Um, so a quick primer. I know the people here have worked with us, I think, for the most part for a while, but the way that we work with independent contractors in general is that we have people all over the United States who provide fee-for-service assessments for primarily judges and stakeholders in other countries to make these informed decisions in the best interest of children. We're not licensing homes. We're not legally approving homes. We're providing these assessments so those stakeholders can make informed decisions. The good thing about, or at least what we think the good thing about working with this network is that it allows us to work with professionals around the country who have a really broad range of experience, diverse experience, work in really diverse kinds of specializations and settings. It allows you all to earn a little bit of extra money and gain some skills in what this kind of wild world of international social work and cross-border social work. And it also, because we've historically allowed contractors to set fees and have some kind of professional autonomy over their work and being an expert in your area, we think it's kind of a nice way to maintain some professional independence and kind of work on your own. I will say the downside of that is that, to remind people, we're working with professionals in technically not every state, but in theory, it could be every state. And that really does come with some challenges in creating uniform systems that work for everybody, billing included. So I'm going to try and cover the basics today, but just know that individual circumstances may come up and we try and work with you case by case to figure everything out. Okay, getting started. So the first step of working with us on a case is setting fees. As you all know. So historically, we have allowed social workers to set fees based on their licensure level, their years and kinds of experience, any kinds of specialization, their location, second language abilities. We are actively engaged in a process to standardize this in a way that really does equitably account for all of those variations in experience, but trying to kind of set fees that are standardized and fair. I know it's whenever we are bringing on somebody new, everybody always wants to know like the range, and it's hard to say because we do have people in all over and with really varied experience. So it's something that we're working on, which is why I have this caveat at the bottom that the structure is subject to change as we kind of go forward. But for now, social workers still have the ability to set fees. Our fees are service specific. So each time and when I say we, it's almost always Danielle reaching out with a request for service. It will be for a specific service where we're asking for that service specific fee. Fees are meant to cover your professional time for the work, which includes travel to the home, and then any case specific travel expenses that you have. So we know that some people are traveling many hours to go to somebody's home for a home assessment. And so certainly if you're traveling 20 minutes to a home, the fee is going to be less than if you were traveling 2 or 3 hours to a home. So we know that there's a lot of range in the kinds of services we ask you to do. And so that's how we account for these different fees or service fees. You also know that fees have to be approved in advance. And so there's a few reasons for that. It does ensure we can get approval for the cost from the foreign court. So you give us your fee and then we have to go and get that approved from whoever is paying for the service. That can take a few days, it can take a few weeks, and in some weird cases, it can take even longer than that. So bear with us, and if you haven't heard from us in a while, you can always check in. In some cases, we do need to bill families directly for at least part of the service, which we do in advance. And so that can also, if we are collecting the fee from the family, that can also create a little bit of a lag time from the time you set your fee and then we're able to approve it and open the case. So those are some of the ways that we are setting fees and things like that. that is and then the fees also have to get approved by our casework supervisor who's here, Katrina Clemens. Most people know her as well. If there are changes over the course of your service, those also have to get approved by the case manager and the casework supervisor. So we hope that there's kind of built into your fee a little bit of a range, right? So if you are calculating 20 miles to the home, but it's 25 miles, bump it up a little bit just so that we're paying you what you're due, but we don't have to go back and haggle over $5 or $10, which unfortunately sometimes we know if we don't build in a little bit of that buffer, we can't pay anything more than what is approved. If there are extenuating circumstances, oftentimes we can approve an increase, but you can't invoice for more than what's been approved. So make sure anytime there's a suggestion that there might be an additional expense, contact the case manager right away. Hi, Maria. And then the last kind of note about fees that I'll say is just a reminder, and I don't think this applies to too many people here, but that the fees that we pay for home studies are not the same rates that agencies pay for adoption home studies or foster care home studies, because we're not conducting an adoption home study or a foster care licensing. We're not licensing. We're not legally approving anything. We don't have the regulatory bodies above us that have to go through that extensive review. We really are providing foreign courts with objective information about what's happening in a home and the suitability of a family caregiver, many of whom are already well known to the child. And so it's just kind of a different nature of a relationship. As many of you know, about half of the home studies we do are actually on parents. So again, it's not to say that the work isn't as important or as needs to be less thorough exactly, but we are not talking about the same level of digging that you would expect in adoption and foster care licensing. Moving on. Another reminder, though I think I've mostly covered this, that for us, when we talk about a case, that is one service. So a service or a case, it could be a home study, a community resource assessment, a child welfare check, a post-placement visit. You probably are familiar with our list of services. But if you have questions about what the service entails when we write to you about it, please let us know, and we'd be happy to kind of make sure you have the templates, examples, so that you can provide fees that are fair. Also, a reminder that a child may need one or more services at a time, sometimes at the same time, sometimes at different times, but each time we have a request, we will ask for those to be separate fees. I said I was only going to briefly talk about fees, but I guess I have a lot to say. We do hope, as part of our increasing efficiency and kind of reliability in how we open cases, that your general service fee stays pretty standard, so that you have your kind of base home study fee that encompasses the professional time it takes to complete interviews and write up a report. But again, we know that the variation will come in how far you have to go. We've been really clear, if you are willing to travel farther distances to do this work, which is a huge value to us, considering the wide range of places we are often asked to do assessments. We can cover things like hotel accommodation if you're staying many hours away, which of course would include incidentals for food and things like that. We do not pay a per diem. And so when we send you the information about a case, it's helpful if you factor in total mileage, and if you know that there'll be incidentals for longer travel. And I say this because if we were to get a fee for you for a particular home study, and then the next one is $500 more, it will extend the time it takes to get that approved, because we're kind of not understanding what the difference is. Once we kind of have this all sorted out, it is helpful to kind of include those estimates separately. So to say my homestay fee is $650, but I'm traveling and it's going to be this amount of mileage and lunch, whatever. So I'm adding $300 for incidentals. That again helps with the approval process, so we understand where any kind of changes in fees come from. But when it comes to signing scope of work agreements and putting the numbers on our documents, quoting a flat fee in that process does make it simpler. And that way you can say, this is the fee for the work, and then with everything else, it will be an additional $300. That total is this amount, and then we use that, and that way we don't have to get individual receipts for every little thing that you purchased, because otherwise we do. So once we have those fees set and approved by our casework by Katrina and by the foreign court, we will go ahead and sign our scope of work with you. I think everybody here has signed one at least, or is in the process of that. So the scope of work agreements are just our standard contracts that establish the nature of the relationship, and we need it on file in order to issue any payment. You'll remember that we used to sign a long form scope of work with each case. The new global scope of work is meant to be a one-time retainer agreement that has all of that contractual language around expectations and liability and confidentiality and all of the kind of legal pieces that was recently updated in the beginning of the year to make sure it's covering our current needs. I don't think it had been updated in the past, like at least 15 years. So the language is new based on the emerging needs of the social work today. And the big change, as you know, is that this new version is not time bound and it's not case specific. So it will remain valid as long as you want it to be and we want it to be. So you can always decide to terminate it at any time. Or if you don't renew your license, if you are in a state where a license is required to practice, or if you don't update your insurance, or fall out of good standing with your licensing board, again, if that's part of the thing. So the language has it so that there's basic expectations of the contractual relationship, and the document is valid as long as you kind of keep up with it. I will make a note about the insurance because I know many people have questions about it. And you can let me know privately if you have specific concerns. But it's always been in our job posting that we seek licensed and insured providers. We know that every state operates a little bit differently in who can practice social work and what kinds of ways they can practice social work. And we have a little bit of discretion in that, but the insurance requirement is something that has been added to the scope of work as a requirement, unless there are very specific extenuating circumstances. And so we don't carry liability insurance to cover everybody in this network. And so part of the change is we've been increasingly asked for proof that everybody is insured. And so it's just an emerging need that we are seeing and something that we really have to make sure we are on top of. So like I said, let me know if you have specific questions about that, but it's something that we'll be tracking. If you have not yet signed a global scope of work with us, but hope to continue working with us and want to just get that done, please send me an email and we can get it all set up. Okay, so now that we have this global scope of work addendum, in theory, if you're continuing to do work with us, we have it signed one time, you're staying licensed, you're staying insured, and you're keeping work for us, then you'll need to do a scope of work addendum for each individual case. And then all it will be is a one-page addendum that the case manager will set up with you. And that should be all you need to make sure that invoicing and getting paid is quick and easy. It's a one-page scope of work that has all of the information. So what to look for in the scope of work addendum, if you have not signed one yet with this, it will need your complete information, even though that will also be on your global scope of work, but make sure we have everything up to date. The scope of work addendum is dated, unlike the global version. It will have the service description of whatever service or services you're providing, so home study, etc. It will have the case number or case numbers if you're doing multiple service, a full case name, which we name our cases by the full name of the oldest child, if it's a sibling group, or the child if it's a single child, and then your service specific fee. So I'll give you it looks a little something like that. Whoops. Like this, if you haven't signed one. And like I said, it's one page, so only the case specific information is there. And that should make it a lot easier and quicker to sign and read and review. You'll sign it, and then our CFO will sign it. And that's it. If you are doing multiple services for a specific family, which I know is the case for some of you, we can put multiple services for the same family on one scope of work addendum. The difference is that there will be multiple services listed. Each will have a case number, and each will have a specific fee. And so, for example, if you're charging, you can charge, say, $350 for a post placement. The scope of work addendum will specify the rate and the number of post-placement reports requested for a total amount. And so that way you're still able to invoice at the individual report level because it's spelled out, but with a maximum billable amount, if that makes sense. Same if you, for example, are doing a home study and a community resource assessment, those are often requested at the same time. Even if you're kind of bundling the cost, which makes sense because it's typically you can do both services in the same one visit, we still need them separated out in case one takes longer or one gets canceled. And so each service needs its own fee listed on that scope of work. And again, this is the responsibility of your case manager to compile and send to you. But it's just so you know, that's why you're being asked to separate the individual costs as opposed to saying, I'll do everything for $1,000. We do need it at the service level. When the work is complete, so we issue payment once we've received the completed report and an invoice from you for the work. Those are the two things we need. We can receive the report without an invoice, so they don't have to be received in the same email, but we cannot process an invoice unless we have a report. And we also can't process payment without an invoice. So just because you've signed a scope of work for a certain amount doesn't mean that we're automatically going to issue payment once we receive the report. We do need an official invoice from you as part of the file. And a quick note about what it means for the work to be complete. Two things here. Number one being background checks. So this is usually the sticky subject. And I'll just remind everybody that background checks are a standard requirement for home studies. We know that the process of obtaining background checks varies widely by state, and that many of you can't independently go and get background checks on family members, that they need to be the ones to do that. We have a whole nother training on background checks and ideas on how to facilitate that and expectations of that as the service. So I'll encourage you to go back and watch that or ask me for the slides if you need them. But we've always really been clear that we don't want to withhold payment for work that you've completed if it's the family's pace and obtaining those background checks that is the holdup. We know that there's a lot of work that goes into preparing these reports outside of background checks, and we want to make sure you're compensated for that fairly. But as a reminder, it is part of the expected service. And so when we sign a scope of work with you for that service in particular, the home study, it's part of the basic expectation. So we would ask you, even once you've received payment, to please follow up with the family and continue to try and get those background checks. and have it really detailed in the report if there's a reason that they can't or won't. Because again, it is part of the expectation. And then the other piece is clarification. So we may get your report, review it, find it sufficient, send it to the requesting agency, and then as you're due, process your invoice. It may be that the referring agency takes a little longer to review and may have some questions about it. So if we come back for clarification on something written or kind of just general questions about something that's in your report, we just expect that you'll continue to communicate with us about them kind of in the spirit of this relationship and to make sure we're meeting those needs. I'm going to talk about addendums separately, but as part of our hope to make sure we're compensating you for the work you're doing quickly, our hope is that you'll stay in communication in case there are those little things that come up after the fact. Now on to invoicing. And I know I'm going quickly, but I'll make sure there's room for questions at the end. So invoices should be submitted either along with or subsequent to submitting the final report or reports. And the key issues here are that the invoice matches the amount you listed on your scope of work addendum. So again, if there's been something that needs to change over the course of the work, then that has to get approved through our channels here. But in most cases, whatever's on that scope of work should be what's on your invoice. It should also have the case number or case numbers and full case names of each of the cases you're working on. Again, that's going to be on your scope of work and it will be on the referral, the case note that you get. It should have your full contact information. So your name, your address, your email, phone number, all that stuff. And specifically as it appears on your W-9. This mostly comes into play for those of you who have a counselor at private practice or work through an LLC. And so if we have a W-9 for your private practice with that LLC and business address, then that's what also needs to be on the invoice. If you otherwise, we can have a separate W-9 for you with your name, your legal name, your address and social security number, and then your personal information on the invoice. But the idea is that it's consistent and the same. It doesn't quite matter which one, but and if you have questions about what we have on file, we can easily answer that. But make sure that if you're Elaine's Counseling LLC, you're invoicing as Elaine's Counseling LLC, and if you are working with us as Elaine Wiseman, you are submitting as Elaine Wiseman. And then also make sure that the invoice is dated and has the address where that payment should be issued. And then here's just kind of an example to show the basic information that we ask for. We do have a template, so if anybody just wants a template to use, send us along, but we know that many of you use billing software or have other kinds of templates, and that's fine as long as the basic stuff is included. And where we get into delays is when the case numbers are wrong or there's missing case information. But we need that for our billing purposes, so we need it from you. And then here is just an example of what it would look like to invoice for multiple services completed at the same time. So you can see it's all the same, but there's multiple case numbers there because there are multiple services. The amounts are specified, and there's the total. Another thing here is if you are doing monthly post placements, let's say, and you have one scope of work that has, let's say, you're going to do 3 post placements over 3 months. You don't have to wait until the three months are done. You can bill for each individual post placement report as they're completed, even though they'll be on one scope of work addendum. But that's where the case number comes in to be important. So if almost always post placement report case numbers are sequential. So just make sure that once you invoice for post placement 1, post placement 2, you update the case number because we obviously can't pay, pay twice for the same case number. Obviously, these are kind of small, detail-y things that are easy to fix, but I'm just putting the reminders out that those are the kinds of details that end up delaying payments in many cases because there's a discrepancy in the case number, the case name, the service, etc. Now getting into some kind of other little things that come up, cancellations. I don't know how many of you have worked on cancellation or cases that have been canceled. Mostly they're canceled pretty quickly and before we even get to start working with you. If you do begin working with a family and the service is canceled before the work can be fully completed, we are able to compensate you for your efforts. That's certainly only fair. And then payment for that effort just depends on how much work was completed, and is subject to approval by mostly your case manager and Katrina. So, if you've gone to the home, you've done the interviews, and you've written the report, that's a full service. But in this often comes up if you are maybe working with a family. You've made a lot of phone calls, you've maybe oriented them to a number of things, you've helped them fill out applications, but you haven't gotten a chance to complete the service. We know that's still valuable time. So in order to be able to make that payment, we do need a letter of efforts as something to kind of as like supplemental documentation with the payment. So just a brief letter to explain the work you've completed, calls to the family, help with paperwork. If you've done anything in person, just detail that in a brief letter so we can make the payment. Edits and supplemental information are just kind of other things that sometimes come up after a report is already submitted. So if you submit a report that requires edits, like oftentimes it's grammar, need to run a spell check, or if there's missing information that really should be there because it's in the template and it's just blatantly missing. Occasionally we've caught cases where we're reading through it and it looks like the information, like the names are wrong, like maybe some of the information hasn't quite been deleted from a previous report, like those kinds of things. That is just an editing thing. We would expect you to do that as part of the review process. We are not going through with a fine-tooth comb to, be hyper editors on this, but if we catch stuff that needs to be addressed, we ask that you just work on that. If we, after review, either our case managers, or the requesting agency has follow-up questions based on information in your report, we may ask for an addendum. If that follow-up is based on information that was included in the case note you got in the referral, or would reasonably be expected within this to be explored in the service, we would typically expect this to be completed at no additional cost. Just it's part of completing the general expectations of the work. If there's a particular area that is in the template and there's no mention of it and we didn't catch it and the agency comes back and says they didn't talk about the fact that the family hasn't seen the kid in 12 years, like that would be reasonably expected in a home study. And so we'd ask you to just write something quick as an addendum. If it's follow-up questions that are based on new information or require a more lengthy addendum or exploration, we can usually work out an additional fee for completing the work. So that would be in examples where, like, let's say after you complete the home study and you send in the report, the family moves. Obviously, that's like a whole nother piece of work. That's a whole nother additional cost. Or if there's, you've done the home study on the father and stepmother, and then the stepmother moves out. That's a change in the nature of what's happening in the home. And so certainly if the agency is requesting information about something that's changed, that's new work. So those are the kinds of things that we can work out on a case-by-case basis, but that's the general rule, that if it's new and different and wouldn't necessarily be expected in the original service, you get additional money. But if it is part of what would be reasonably expected within the nature of the service as described in the scope of work, we ask that you complete that. And a reminder that background checks are part of the service. So if you do need to revise your recommendation after receiving a background check, that would be expected to be part of the fee that you've set. Now on to payments. So the things that we need to have on file in order to issue a payment to you or your business is a signed W-9. Again, typically if we work with you regularly, we only need that once, but if your name or address changes or if there's a new IRS form, we might need to update it, but that will be in rare cases. We need a copy of your liability insurance on file and this global or long-term scope of work. So again, if all of these things can be filed in advance, we don't need them each time unless we're working with you for the first time. And then we need that case-specific scope of work addendum. So once all of those things are on file with our agency, we can issue payment. And then lastly, this is about timing. So most of you know this, our finance office makes payments twice per month. They do need a little time to ensure that all of the supporting documents are in order. A lot of these changes that I've described were put in place in the hopes of facilitating that. But if we are issuing payment on the 15th and we get your invoice on the 14th, it will not be paid on the 15th. So we do need time to just kind of get everything in order, and we appreciate your patience on that. So I would say that give us a 4-week period to make sure everything's in order before following up. If it's been 1 month and you have not received payment, at that point, that would be a very reasonable time to say what's going on, especially if you haven't heard from us. If you've submitted your invoice and then within the next couple days or so or a week, you're hearing back from your case manager that something needs to be changed or updated, that probably means the payment will get pushed into the next cycle. So that's why I give the 4-week notice that there's just, we are a small team in office. And so it just takes us a little bit of time to get everything in order. And then just a reminder that if there's missing or incorrect information on the invoice, like if the case numbers aren't right, if we're missing a case name, if there's a discrepancy in your address from the W-9 to your this, those are the kinds of things that are the most likely causes of delays. And so your help to just kind of make sure that the information you're submitting is kind of as I've described it should help make sure your payments are processed as quickly as possible.